Guys, welcome back to another Because YouTube video. Today we got our top 24 wide receivers for week 9 of fantasy football.
And boys, go check out our SOBET. It's the first link in the description. On our SOBET, we post start, sit, and sleeper every single primetime game for fantasy football. We have our trade for and trade away players. You also get exclusive content for the other 25 creators on there. It's a great community and we love to see you over there. Top link in the description.
And the wide receiver one, yes, we say it's a wide receiver one every week, but this is the closest he's probably being to not being the receiver one. He does have an ankle injury, could miss the game. Obviously, if he misses, don't play him. But if he's healthy, Cooper Kupp is still amazing, still should be the wide receiver one in fantasy football.
And our wide receiver 2, no surprise here, it's Justin Jefferson. He's the wide receiver 2 every single week. Great matchup, great player, and is always elite for fantasy.
And next up, we got Stephon Diggs. He has been insane for fantasy football so far. He's the wide receiver 1 in points per game. Yeah, again, he's been so good. Great matchup against the Jets. Expect them to kill the Jets. Jets did not look great last week. Yes, their record is good, but again, they were pretty much... yeah, they look pretty bad against the Patriots. Expect Diggs to have a big game again this week.
And our last player in the elite wide receiver 1 tier is Tyreek Hill. We used to have him a tier below, but he's earned this elite wide receiver 1 tier. He's getting so many yards, has by far the most yards in the league, over 900. Not getting a ton of touchdowns, but gets lots of targets, lots of receptions. We love Tyreek in fantasy.
Next up, first player in wide receiver 1 is Devontae Adams. He was awful last week. So bad. I believe he had under 2 fantasy points. It was disgusting. One of his worst games he's probably had in a long time. But he was sick, so that could be an excuse for him this week, and it's a pretty solid matchup against the Jaguars. Expect him to get back to his normal self and should have another good game for fantasy.
And next, at wide receiver 6, we have DeAndre Hopkins. He has been balling out. Last week, over 33 points. The week before, over 20 points. Everyone was skeptical after the 6-game suspension, but D-Hop is back. Going against the Seahawks, maybe not the best matchup. They're pretty good against wide receivers, but D-Hop is great for fantasy.
Next up, we got Mike Evans. Yes, this Buccaneers offense has been all over the place, has not looked great in recent weeks. But if you're in a PPR league, it doesn't really matter for Mike Evans because he gets so many targets. It's a pretty safe floor. Yes, it's a tough matchup against the Rams. They are pretty tough against wide receivers, especially with Jalen Ramsey. But again, when he gets that many targets, you're pretty safe. You know our wide receiver 1 for fantasy football.
And our last player in this tier is A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was spectacular last week. Over 30 fantasy points. Was the wide receiver 1 on the week. He balled out 3 deep touchdowns. He was amazing this week going against the Texans. They could blow him out like they blew out the Steelers last week. Maybe less passing to end the game, but A.J. Brown has good touchdown upside, has deep play upside. We love him for week 9.
And first player in the next tier is Jalen Waddle. Again, like Tyreek Hill, he has been awesome this year. Both of them have been so good in real life and in fantasy. Jalen Waddle, again, over 30 points last week. It's another good matchup against the Bears. We expect him to have another great game.
And next up, our wide receiver 10 is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra last week wasn't amazing, had over 13 points. Not great, not terrible, but they just lost TJ Hawkinson. That probably means even more targets for St. Brown. He's already a target monster. We love him in week 9.
Next up, we got T. Higgins. He wasn't as good last week as we thought he would be without Jamar Chase making him the clear wide receiver 1. But again, still had over 10 fantasy points. It was a decent performance. The Bengals offense just looked awful against the Browns. But this week against the Panthers, not a super hard matchup, not a super easy matchup. Again, he's a borderline wide receiver 1.
And our last player in this tier is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen hasn't done anything spectacular this year so far, but this could be the week against Atlanta. Atlanta is terrible against wide receivers. They're currently number 32, worst in the league. Keenan has an elite QB in Justin Herbert, and he has a great chance to break out in week 9.
First player in the next tier, we got Chris Godwin. Again, yes, it's a tough matchup against the Rams, but like Mike Evans, they both get tons of targets, which gives them a pretty safe floor in fantasy football. Again, don't love the matchup, but love the player and the potential upside with his targets.
And at wide receiver 14, we have Chris Olave. Last week, he wasn't that great, but wasn't terrible. Had around 10 or 11 fantasy points. This week, goes against the Ravens. It's a pretty tough defense, but we expect the Saints to go down in this game. Have to throw it a lot. There's a good chance Michael Thomas doesn't play. Jarvis Landry's on the fence. Chris Olave, no matter what, should be the wide receiver 1, even if Landry plays in a good game script against the Ravens. We like him as a solid wide receiver 2.
Next up, we got DK Metcalf. I have no idea how on earth he played last week, but he did, and he was great. Over 17 points, scored a touchdown against the Giants. This week, it's a pretty good matchup against the Cardinals. I don't believe they are super good against wide receivers this season. Again, I don't know how DK's healthy, but he is, and he's been putting up fantasy points, so he's got to be an elite wide receiver 2.
Our last player in this elite wide receiver 2 tier is DJ Moore. DJ Moore last week, amazing. Over 27 fantasy points. did kind of sell the game for the Panthers, but that doesn't matter for fantasy. The week before had close to 20 points. He's been on an absolute tear against the Bengals. The Bengals are really good against the run. They're not amazing against the pass. They're not terrible. It's a mid matchup. DJ Moore's been balling out, so he's a mid wide receiver too.
Next up, first player in the next tier is Michael Pittman. Had 12.3 fantasy points last week. Would have been more if he didn't drop that crucial play, drop that crucial catch late in the fourth quarter that really, really hurt the Colts. But again, he was decent with Sam Ehlinger. Sam Ehlinger looked competent, making Michael Pittman a mid wide receiver 2 this week.
And next up at wide receiver 18, we have Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was pretty solid last week, over 15 fantasy points, caught that touchdown near the end of the game to save his week. This week against the Cardinals, it's a pretty good matchup. Last time the Cardinals did play the Seahawks just ran the ball a lot, didn't have to throw it. The Cardinals are looking a bit better of a team. Seahawks should have to throw it more, making DK better and Lockett better. We like the matchup this week.
Next up, we got Juju Smith-Schuster. He was on bye last week, but the 2 weeks prior to that, over 100 yards both games. Over 20 fantasy points both games, and the matchup against the Titans is great. Titans have been pretty horrible against wide receivers. With how he's been playing, definitely a mid wide receiver 2, or even better this week for Juju Smith-Schuster.
And our first player in the last tier, borderline wide receiver 2, we have Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis is a boomer bust guy every single week. Last week was kind of a bust, didn't do amazing. This week against the Jets, he's shown upside against the Jets in the past. I think last year, in the final game of the season, had 15 targets, but the Bills could blow him out, leading to more runs. Don't love him this week, don't hate him. Again, he's a boomer bust guy. He's either going to win your matchup, or he's just going to be pretty bad.
Next up, we got Jacoby Myers. He was awesome last week. Had over 20 fantasy points with Mac Jones returning, but the matchup is not super great. Colts are the number 2 team in fantasy against wide receivers, so it's a tough matchup. But again, with how he's been playing, definitely a wide receiver 2 in fantasy football.
And next up at wide receiver 22, we have Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd looked disappointing last week, but then got that touchdown near the end of the game. With Jamar Chase out, he's the clear wide receiver 2. Going against the Panthers, not an amazing matchup, not terrible. He's solid for week 9.
And at wide receiver 23, we got Christian Kirk. He was pretty bad last week, did not put up a ton of fantasy points, but it's a much easier matchup this week against the Vegas Raiders. Both defenses aren't great. We would not be surprised at all if both teams put up a ton of points. Kirk does really well, Josh Jacobs, ETN, but this is about Christian Kirk. We would not be surprised at all if he puts up a decent amount of fantasy points and is a low-end wide receiver 2 for us this week.
And our last player of the video, we have Allen Lazard. We are assuming he does return. The Packers offense was just running through their RBs all game last week against the Bills. This week, the Packers going against the Lions. We do love the RBs, but Lazard looks like the clear wide receiver 1 when he's healthy, and he's a super low-end wide receiver 2 in week 9.
And guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Again, check out SOBET. We got our own exclusive content and exclusive content from over 25 other creators. Again, first link in the description. Thanks again for watching. See you guys next time.